Thunder's Mouth Theatre presents something very different for you today. I've embarked on a series of interviews, which I'm calling, wait for it, Are You Old Yet? Because the idea is that I'm interviewing people of my generation. I mentioned this to someone and they said, oh, is it all only going to be creative people? And I thought, I only know creative people, so yes. Now, the first cab off the rank here is Margi Brown Ash. Margi is, as well as being the patron of Thunder's Mouth Theatre and a jolly good friend for a good 20, 25 years or so, Margi is a theatre maker. She's a performer, she's a collaborative mentor and art supervisor, and she's a writer. And she lives in Brisbane and Sydney, shares her time. She's got family and work in both places. And we got talking. Margi insisted that rather than an interview, we made this a conversation. So I talk way too much. We chatted about, well, you'll find out what we chatted about. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, gosh, Margi, it really is so great to have you just sitting there and we're chatting. And I haven't seen you for at least 7.5 years, because that's how long I've been back in the UK.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time. That's gone fast.
It has.
And Floyd, you're happy with that decision? Because I always think of you and I think, oh, Floyd, if you were in Queensland with us, you wouldn't be cold.
But you know what, Margi? If I was in Queensland with you, I'd be hot.
Yes.
And not in a good way.
There are fires going across Queensland at the moment.
Again. Oh, good. Yeah.
The heat is extraordinary up there at the moment.
Yeah. No, I am very happy that the way this has turned out, because when I came back to Australia when I was in my 50s, the first summer, I just thought I was going to die. I just could not handle it. I could not function in that heat. And it's way hotter now than it was, like back in the 1990s.
You managed to function, Floyd. You got a PhD.
I know. My son bought me an air conditioner.
Yes, I get it.
Yeah. So, I did function. But to not be able to even go for a walk. And here I can walk at any time of the day. And it's never going to be so hot that I'll get burnt. Where my skin just, as a child.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did you grow up, Margi?
New South Wales. I grew up in country New South Wales. And then when I was at university age, I went to Sydney. And then from there, I sort of launched myself around the world. But yeah, primarily country New South Wales. So I'm a country girl. Huh?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Yass.
Were you? So you're a country girl too. And then when did you go to North Queensland? We
moved to North Queensland when I was we went to Thursday Island first when I was 4. And then 5, we were in Cairns. And I started school in Townsville before my 6th birthday. So, yeah. And then we were in PNG, where it was even hotter.
So what did your dad and mum do?
Well, my dad was, first and foremost, he was a sailor. He adored being on boats. He'd run away to sea when he was 14, I think, and his parents went and got him back. But then when he was 16, he just joined the Merchant Navy, and he just adored being at sea. So he was a sea captain. He was also a scallywag who would just take off, have a brilliant idea, forget to send money back, So my mother became a dressmaker, seamstress. She always sewed. And a lot of it she did at home, making curtains and that sort of stuff. But she used to make all our clothes. Yeah, so that's how she sort of supported us.
And how do you sew?
I do. Well, I don't do very often, but I have a sewing machine. On and off, I'll have a sewing machine. I'll sell the sewing machine and move to a new place, and then I'll buy another one. That's how it goes.
It's probably good. They're probably
it's handy.
Yeah. They probably need replacing every few years.
And well, I get a cheaper one every time. They brought the price down hugely.
It's interesting, isn't it? I always think of flights like that back in the day in 78, I headed for London, and to get a ticket I went through the US, and to get a ticket to New York with only about 1,700, that was a flexible ticket. And I think that the price isn't any different now. Oh, it could be now post, post, but now we're in the pandemic. It could be different. But they didn't go up. They was very similar.
No, they kept, there's new airlines would come in and undercut, and they managed to keep it that way.
Yeah.
My first trip overseas was by sea. I got one of the last sea voyages when it was cheaper to travel by sea than by air. So, I took off July 66 with a friend that I'd met at Brisbane Arts Theatre.
Oh,
yeah.
And then how was that on the way to London?
Yes. Our plan was, it was a Greek ship, and it stopped in Athens, Piraeus, the port for Athens. And then we overlanded to London, stopping off to do some au pairing on the way. So, yeah.
Do you have very fond memories of that trip?
I do. Very fond. Yeah. It was exciting. It was scary in the best possible way. I, being a good Australian socialist, I don't know where I got it from, but when I discovered what, socialism was, after I'd arrived in London and I fell in with a group of Marxists, rabid Marxist-Leninists, and I said, well, what is it? What is it? And they said, well, it's about, everybody, sort of clubbing together to look after people, making sure that, we community. And I said, well, isn't that just being a decent human being? So there's my politics for you.
I like those politics because I agree with you. I think that, that's why I like leaning to the left, because it is a way of acknowledging that we are all one. But that has kind of gone by the by for a little while.
Well, if you look at the history of the Labour Party, in Australia especially, but here as well, it didn't, it's not quite... those ideals weren't actually what they were quoted. They were just about looking after their own. There was I found myself teaching modern Australian history at ACU in Brisbane for a year.
Wow.
So I had to rapidly learn some.
How fascinating.
And I learned just how deeply racist the Australian Labor Party had been from its inception.
Oh, whoa. Well, hopefully our Albo isn't. I got a lot of time for his politics. Not everything I agree with, to be honest, but I think we're on track to create change here. Mm-hmm. But you know what I'm interested in, because I think in my life it's happened too, that the biggest trip, the first trip, like my first trip away was in 70, and I was an exchange student in Houston, Texas for a year. And I think that trip had a profound impact on my life. And I'm just wondering whether that trip that you did in 66 had a profound influence. That first trip that we do away as adults, not we've got parents looking after us, but as adults.
Yeah. I think it did, because it gave me, it was that, I was 21, 22, very, very naive, emotionally very immature. And so it was just Kathy and me with my idealistic no class system. We booked on a ship that was one class. However, it had about 6 decks, and if you paid more, you were on the top deck looking out. And so we went for the second bottom deck. And the first thing we did was sort of ask around, was there anybody, what groups could you join? And we fell in with a bunch of young people who were all theatre people. There were musicians, there were actors, there were about a dozen of us. And we sort of formed ourselves, when I think back, you would say we formed ourselves into a concert party. So the ship, they had certain events like crossing the equator, and some festival things that they were, there was a fancy dress costume. and they just called for volunteers from the passengers to entertain. There weren't entertainment troops on board. You did your own. And sort of coming out of the sort of Pro-Am, Brisbane Rep and Brisbane Arts, which is what I'd been involved in for like the 3 years that I'd been in Brisbane, suddenly I found myself in a situation of initiating stuff rather than doing what I was told. And so you have an idea. Somebody says, what are we going to do? And I say, well, there's this goon song, you know, that's just silly. And they said, how does it go? I said, what was it? If you're feeling pimply and your knees are turning blue, don't be nervous, simply go ee-ah-ooh-ooh-ooh. So so pulled all my memory of ballet lessons when I was 8 years old and tap to you know, to choreograph a little sort of thing to go with it. So I found myself doing that and working with these people. They were mostly from Melbourne, some much more experienced performers as well. And it was just a really fun, once I got over the seasickness, experience. And then finding myself in Greece, and I can remember an occasion we'd gone to, I think it's a beach just outside of Athens, and just looking around and thinking, this is a country that has had to fight for itself here. And that feels different from Australia. Obviously, white girl perspective, you know, and in ignorance of a lot of what had gone on as well at that stage. I learned so much more about what Australian settlement effect had it in Australia, in this country, from watching documentaries than I ever learned before I left. So much more. But yes, and that whole experience of just being in other cultures and with no sense of judgment, just, oh, is that how you do that? Oh, that's interesting. Just the complete wash in it, you know, immersed in it. Yeah. It was just, it was pretty amazing.
And you know, they talk about it's a baptism of fire, you know, like we all went over. And I think it's quite different now because our kids, even, you know, with parents, travel so much more than in our generation. And just seeing the different generations. Something I'm really interested in is how do we deal, I guess my thesis at the moment is, how do we deal with aging, making sure that our generation has motivational and interesting and challenging ways of being in the world, rather than playing bingo and you know, going to the RSL and playing bridge. I just see a vast difference between our generation and our parents' generation. Not that my mother ever played bridge, but my mother-in-law did. It was very big in her life, that sort of friendship. But I just think it is so important, and I don't think we're there yet. I don't think that we've worked out how to deal with ourselves as older people. And I guess that's a mission that I have, that I really want to interrogate around the world, how people are doing that and how organizations are doing that, because I think gone is the time where you can just go up to an old person and say, hello, darling, how are you? Do you want a cup of tea? I think we've gone beyond that. It's, you know, can you help me with this political issue, please? It should be something like that, you know, because supposedly the new research shows that our brains get stronger. We may forget superficial things, but we actually have far more capacity as we age, because we also have patience woven in there and the ability to reflect. Now, I'm not talking about everyone. Some people don't have the ability to reflect. And I think that how the internet could actually be, at the same time as building us up, tearing us down. The idea that we can't concentrate. And there's a book that I've just bought called The Stolen Focus. Probably you would probably be interested in this, Stolen Focus. And it talks about how, you know, the social media and things like that, the bites, you know, we can't concentrate longer than a bite of information anymore. And that means that we can't focus on the issues that are truly destroying us, like climate change. We can't focus on that long enough. So it's like, oh, climate change. We've gone. That's all. We've allowed it in for a minute, and then we're on to the next post. This is incredibly concerning.
Yes.
And how do we as elders, and I think our job is to do this, how do we help that next generation coming through avoid the pitfalls, and then they help the next generation? I think that we've got to start small. Maybe we've just got to help ourselves.
Yes.
Initially.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lovely that you dived into that. And I'm hearing where you're coming from, because I don't know if I told you, but when I had the idea of thinking, I could interview people of my age. Nobody else is doing that. I can do that. And as against the podcast, which is called Am I Old Yet? Because this was the question that I had originally, I would call it, Are you old yet? At some stage of the interview, I will hit my interviewee with this question. And because you dived in there, I'm already going, okay, Margi's where I was 10 years ago. This is so interesting. Because, again, my brilliant idea when I first had it was I'll interview people over 70. You're not over 70.
I am.
Are you?
I'm 70. Yeah.
Oh, you hit it. Oh, right. Oh, well, in that case, there you go. Floyd, you look marvelous for your age. And I hate what? I either look marvelous or I don't. It's got nothing to do with age.
I agree with you totally. I just think that they're the sort of things we're going to get rid of.
So I have been thinking about this stuff for years now. I've examining myself. So this whole idea of what is my problem? I can remember my mother in her 90s being very cross with my older sister, who would then have been in her 60s, calling herself an old woman. My mother was outraged at this. But my sister is one of these people who has kind of always been an old woman. It's interesting, her attitudes. She's one of the ones that she doesn't play bridge or anything, but she's settled. She settles, for stuff. And I never did. So we're just two totally different people. So the idea that when you're young, and then we had this youth culture that started really pushing itself out in the 80s and the 90s, where young people were allowed to say, well, speaking as a young person, and, me in my 40s and 50s going, what's that got to do with it, So then there comes a point where you have to go, well, I suppose I'm middle-aged. I'd rather be young, but I'm middle-aged. But then there comes a point where you're not middle-aged anymore, but you're not allowed to call yourself old. So I sort of set off on a mission to reclaim the word old, and that's how the podcast came about. But the more I had Helen in the podcast examining this question and debating it with her friends and her daughters, the more I realized there is so much, it's the baggage attached to that word old, which we as a culture, and it's not just Western culture either, it happens in just about every culture, there comes a point where you're past it in the eyes of younger people, and you don't want to be thought of as past it. So you can't say you're old, because if you're old, you're past it. Old means decrepit, useless, worn out, death's door, all of these negative things. So we don't have a word that's just states, this is the generation I'm in. It's this generation.
What about elderhood?
Elderhood, great. But it's for special occasions. It's just not, I love that you just use it naturally. It just flows out of you. But society isn't there yet.
But if you look at the word old, when we say, oh, that's old, like we're looking at a chair, oh, that's so old. There's no way I can use it. Let's just toss it. I think that we use it in so many ways that infects when we're talking about people. If we can, some words aren't appropriate to apply to people. And why I'd just like to replace it. Old can be old for other things, but I think I think that it's so deeply entrenched. Old we discard because we are society in the West, that eldership I embrace. I love being an elder. I don't think I've ever wanted to be younger than I am, ever. Because there's so much richness as we age and as we understand and not talk, because we know that things change. And so you hear young people talking, you think, now I could interrupt that and sort of add a little bit of wisdom, but perhaps it's not even necessary, because they will reach their own wisdom at the perfect time for them. So that I think that as I have aged, there's been the need to fix things has certainly reduced enormously. And that could have something to do with my therapeutic training, because that's what we're trying to do. Well, of course it has something to do with that. But it also has in my private life, I think, is it worth it? You weigh up before you. So it's the reflective thinking skills that we develop as we grow older, and the fact that it doesn't stop. You used the word settling earlier, and I thought that was a marvelous word, because that's what I think in our world we cannot afford to do. Can I add the word next to settling? Comfort. We want to be comfortable. And I think the more, she says, on all these pillows, but we want to be comfortable.
Yes.
But we don't have to have, pillows from the most exclusive shop in town. Like comfort is scary for me. As soon as I start to feel comfortable, I go, oh, Margi, turn on your reflective skills again. So I think it's the downfall and I'm not talking about basic needs. We need you in England. I do worry about you, Floyd, being cold, because I hate being. You hate being hot, so you worry about being hot. Like, I think that there are things that it is good to have some sort of comfort in, and a safe house, I think, is very, very important. My PhD was home and belonging. I mean, I investigated that thoroughly, but settling and comfort, danger.
As someone who has always moved, from my childhood, we were moving every 3 years, if not more often, right through my childhood. I went on into adulthood feeling 3 years are up, I better move. Whereas my sister, who had exactly the same upbringing, she didn't. She just wanted to, be there with the nice house and the hubby and the kids and do her thing there and not move. So it's not just the upbringing, obviously. There's something in the genes. A lot of my father, I think, his rat bag, I'm off. I've had a brilliant idea, I'm off, sort of thing.
Yeah, but Floyd, have you been reading Bruce Lipton's work on epigenetics? Now, I think you might be interested in this. He's written this book called The Biology of Belief, and he really believes deeply, and he's a well-renowned scientist, that the genes have about 1%. It is environment, because the genes change with environment. The environment impacts the genes and can turn things on and off. And to me, that is such a beautiful freedom, because I'm working on a play at the moment with Zach Callahan, used to be Stace Callahan, we've got a grant from Pride Australia and some other organization to write this play about transitioning. And they have a mother, and I'm going to be playing the mother, but I may not. I might get someone else to play it. I don't know if I want to perform anymore. They have a mother who has dementia. So what comes up with the children of people who have had parents with dementia? Oh, that might be me. But in fact, that's not necessarily the case. It can be the case, if you don't change your behaviors, because it's the environment that dictates, as opposed to the small influence of genetics, epigenetics.
Yeah, I shall check it out. What are we talking about?
I think that we were talking about settling and comfort and old and
that's right.
Old and the word elder, and the other word that I'd love to talk a little bit about is wisdom, because I think that unless we develop our wisdom, growing old is not a guarantee that we are growing wise.
No, absolutely, it's not a given.
What's scary about our world. because I think it's even more now, because we can escape, we can escape into a fluffhood.
But yes, but I come back to, I really admire your passion and your ambition in this, and I hope you succeed. I have a very, very cynical brain, which my mother modeled this cynicism for me very much so. And it doesn't matter that when she got into her 50s and she married my lovely stepfather, Monty, and she found Jesus, and a lot changed. She changed a lot of her behavior and her attitudes. She changed in her 50s, but still that cynicism was there. And so it's a habit. I look forward to seeing how it goes. I do feel, again, just my experience, that there are people just as there are people who do things, and there are people who let things be done to, or have things done to them. They don't have the whatever the thing that says, I'm going to be just doing this thing now, I'm going to change and I'm going to do that. There are people who stay, as you say, they are modeled, they grow up in a stable environment, and the thing you do is you get married, marry the girl next door, you get a job just like dad or mum, and you have kids, and you do that. And they are the majority of people worldwide. They just want a comfortable life, and they will do the thing that they believe is going to give it to them. And then there is the minority, which is us, who want something else, who want something more than a comfortable life, who actually want to be creating something, making something out of nothing but ourselves, if you like, which is what art is. I saw a total diversion, but two things: having a conversation with Ira Seidenstein, and then watching a video of a wonderful Polish mime artist that I'd never heard of before, because they both had very fascinating stories about how they got into being the clown or the mime, the teachers that they both became.
Who was the Polish mime? I studied Polish mime in New York City.
The one that you studied with, I looked him up. I couldn't pronounce his name.
Stefan Niedzikowski.
Thank you. Yes, him. Yeah. Yes. I saw that you'd studied with him. I went, who is this mime? So I found him. So the question came into my mind to ask and never to answer, if you like. Are artists born? Can they be made? Or do they make themselves? Now, he clearly made himself with the help of his teachers and his mentors. Ira, exactly the same. He made himself the clown that he is, with the help of all the teachers and the mentors and the wonderful artists that he's worked with as well, but this also comes out of our did I say I was on the Zoom call with these voice teachers last night, or was I? No, I was telling Ian. Forget who I've said things to. It was a young woman, voice teacher. She's trying to form a panel for the Vasta conference in May or June or August, whenever it is. And the first question she asked was, how should we be teaching? Should we be teaching the way we are taught, passing on what was given to us by our teachers, their pedagogy, or should we be arriving at our own way of teaching? And I had to leap in and say, please do the second, please, pretty please. But it is that question about, how we teach, how we train. It's for you and for me, it's not about, I have a methodology, and if you do my methodology, it'll be wonderful. It's about, who are you? What do you want to do? How can I facilitate you to do that thing that you want to do?
Yeah, using my methodology, please.
Well, absolutely, because my way is the only way.
I think that binaries can get in the way. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I think it's really useful.
That's exactly what it is.
It's useful.
And your way of doing it It's going to be the way you do that methodology,
And
your way.
if it's a collaborative practice, which is what I embrace, and you, I'm sure, but the idea of collaborative work is what I've studied for decades. I think that then people have a choice. So even though, I have a rigorous framework in which I work, people have enormous space within that framework. Whereas there are other methodologies, for example, probably back, it's so long ago since I did Polish Mime, but it certainly has influenced my work enormously. Back in the 70s, 80s. And also the other physical theatre work that has influenced me greatly was Frank theatre, John and John. But the methodologies were very strong and very, you do it this way. But I think that is fabulous as a basis. And if you have developed your critical thinking skills, you are then able to morph that into something that is more suitable for the generation that you're teaching, because every generation is different. The generation we are dealing with at the moment, my grandkids are younger than yours, and they are growing up in a pandemic world. One has never known anything else. One has known 3 years of something else, but nothing since. Very different. Everything will be different for those young kids, and the importance of turning up for them and helping them through those differences.
Well, now I'm hitting the pause button on this conversation between myself and Margi Brown Ash here, and I'm calling this Transitioning into Elderhood, Part 1. Part 2 will follow in due course. The music you heard is written and performed by composer, arranger, and multi-instrumentalist John T LaBarbera. You can download his music on Bandcamp or via his website, johntlabarbera.com. Okay, now if you are enjoying this, I do hope you will spread the word with your friends. That's the only way we grow our audience, is by word of mouth. So spread the word. Thanks for listening. Stay safe.